When most people hear the term Thomas the Tank Engine, understandably they're gonna think of talking trains, very bright colors, and children's stories, as that's largely what the show became. However, I'd argue there are many more iconic features than just that. For example, in reference to the model series, they had two main ways of grounding all of these things. One with very realistic and grimy sets, and two with the rolling stock the locomotives would pull. It created a contrast that somehow brought all of that into the real world, or at least made it feel like it could have been such. I'd personally argue that rolling stock is one of the most important features of the model era, and because of that, I thought it'd be fun to bring back the History of series one more time for another go. This time finally on them, the standard gauge Troublesome Trucks. Or realistically, all of the ones that are on Thomas Tank Merch's blogspot. Really quick, I want to give a huge thank you to Ricky and Lewis for giving me permission to use such to make this video. I highly recommend you guys check that out after this. It's a better way to see the rolling stock more up close from some of the people who actually own them. This is made to be more of a video-like narrative to go alongside it. So with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into it. Starting with the most iconic Troublesome Trucks, the 7-planks. Now, these are the first trucks that come to mind when people think of Troublesome Trucks, and the crew had easily more of these than anything, and naturally we would see many versions throughout the show. The original one from Season 1 was simply a 10-mile 7-plank kit that was vacuformed and painted gray and brown, and weathered pretty randomly in that iconic Season 1 style. The kit was built as per the instructions, and it's very easy to tell these wagons apart from the others because of the railing they have at the very top, that sits above where the face goes. Every 7-plank built for Season 1 has this feature. The 7 planks built from Seasons 2 to 5 were nearly identical and made from the same 10-mile kits, however, they did notably lack the railing above the face. Most of these wagons were painted in a washed-out green, and you can tell these apart from the Season 1 ones since no Season 1 truck had that color. The next and final variation is the resin 7-plank. These were introduced in Season 7, and were engineered so parts from older 10-mile wagons could be used on them and vice versa. They looked nearly identical to the Seasons 2 through 5 7-planks, though the giveaway is the detail, especially the rivets, as on these they are much more pronounced. The resin 7-planks were originally and only painted in dark green, but in Seasons 8 and 9 they started appearing in much more colorful and toy-like liveries. It's also worth noting, before I forget, the faces for the trucks were made the exact same way as the faces for the engines were. They were sculpted in clay, and from that resin casts were made using a silicone mold. Instead of having an eye mech, the wagons had painted eyes with stickers as pupils, so they could often be rearranged and moved. All except for Season 1, which instead of these faces would use stickers. That's the only time I'm going to bring up faces since I don't want to be repetitive, so that not only applies here but for the others as well. And with the 7-planks out of the way, let's move on to the tankers. The standard tankers seen from Seasons 1 to 9 were standard 10-mile tanker kits. A few specialty tankers were made from Seasons 8 to 9, however, from resin. The only time the tankers were seen with faces was in the Season 4 episode Toad Stands By, and these are the same faces used on the narrow gauge slate wagons. During Season 8, the cream and raspberry syrup tankers were made new from resin, but were not copies of the original 10-mile design. I'd say the most notable difference is the tank itself. During Season 10, they made resin copies of the actual 10-mile tankers, which can be seen here in the episode Toby's Afternoon Off, and many of those tankers were, and currently are on display at Drayton Manor. Only one of the iconic Sodor fuel tankers was ever made, and is seen here on display at Nitrogen Studios in 2013. And here's a photo of a normal 10-mile tanker provided by Thomas Tank Merch. Personally, I'd say the tankers are some of my favorite rolling stock ever, so it's kinda cool to know how many different variants they actually had. Even more weird to know they only had one Sodor fuel tanker. But let's not hang on that for too long, and instead move on to the CCT or utility vans. Now, the CCT vans are fan favorites, and have appeared as both regular utility vans as well as mail coaches, of which several variants exist. The first version we ever saw was a stock 10-mile kit, save for the fact the bogies were replaced with single axle wheel sets. Another CCT was built per the kit instructions for the Season 5 episode Something in the Air. The mail vans built for Season 3 were made to the exact same design, save for the fact this time they had the right bogies, and new mail coaches were made from resin for Thomas and the Magic Railroad, and were used for the rest of the model era. Thankfully, these are pretty easy to spot, since they have a very large roof that overhangs pretty notably, as well as sit on a completely new chassis. The 10-mile CCTs last appeared in the Season 6 episode, The World's Strongest Engine and Elizabeth the Vintage Lorry. They also had a coach that was used for scrap in a few background shots. From there we move on to the salt vans. The salt vans were seen up to Season 7 and then again in Season 12, and made from normal 10-mile kits, just like the others. They originally were seen in two colors, cream and brown, and would remain these colors until Thomas and the Magic Railroad. Magic Railroad on, the salt vans were painted white, as well as a more red-brown. Duck is seen here pulling the white version in a Season 12 episode, Best Friends. Resin versions of the salt vans were never made, and the 10-mile ones were used right up until the end. Here we can see a photo of the salt van Thomas Tank Merch owns, and here's a photo of the salt van as seen in the 1986 10-mile catalog. Next, we move on to the LBSCR van, which, much like the salt van, was built for the second season and lasted well into the hit era. Notably, we can see two of these vans in this shot from the Season 2 episode, Dirty Work. The vans were painted a weather brown until Thomas and the Magic Railroad. It's not 100%, but the last time one of these vans was ever seen was in the Season 10 episode It's Good to Be Gordon, seen all the way in the background in the far right. Just like the salt van, these never had resin copies made of them, and the originals would appear until the show's end. Another fan favorite and a personal favorite of mine is the Linton and Barnstaple closed van, built for Season 2 and seen up until Season 5. These pretty iconically were seen in the Season 2 episode A Close Shave. And what's very interesting about these vans is they're made to be 16mm narrow gauge models that actually ran on O-gauge track. The crew either did not know this or chose to ignore it, and built them to run on gauge 1 track with buffers and chain link couplings, which is why it appears so large when compared to other rolling stock. These vans would gain additional weathering and chalk markings during Season 4, and were still in this condition until their last appearance in Season 5. It's not known if they appeared any time after that, so if anybody happens to know, be sure to comment down below. And keeping with that L&B theme, let's move on to the Linton and Barnstaple open wagon. Now, just like the van, this was introduced in Season 2, and was also intended to be a narrow gauge model for 16mm track. These wagons, however, would blend much better with the rolling stock already made, unlike their very large and awkward counterparts. These vans were seen from Season 2 all the way up until Season 6. Believe it or not, there was another 16mm scale wagon as well. Now we move on to the Freelance open wagon. This tiny truck is not based on any particular design. It was one of 10 Mile's own designs, and meant to complement the many Freelance narrow gauge live steam locomotives found in 16mm scale. In Thomas, however, these wagons were built to gauge 1 for the second season, and lasted all the way up until Season 6. Much like the L&B open wagon, these would blend with the other rolling stock very well, though unlike the van, would almost suffer from being a bit small, which I also guess is one of their most iconic features. These things are pretty tiny, which we can see here in this photo provided by Thomas Tank Merch. And that, ladies and gentlemen, has been how they made the Troublesome Trucks. It would take a very long while to go through where every single one ended up, and to be honest, I don't really know. Many are at Drayton Manor, some I'm sure are in Mattel's storage. We're lucky enough that Thomas Tank Merch has a couple, but with all of that aside, hopefully you'll leave this video with a little bit more knowledge than you already had, and just maybe a new appreciation for the rolling stock we grew up seeing. Really quick, I want to give a huge shout out to my patrons, since videos like this wouldn't be possible without their support, and if you ever want to see videos like this early, I recommend checking that out too. Link in description. As always guys, thanks again for watching, and if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to like and subscribe for even more train content. There's always more stuff on the way. Brush your teeth, eat your greens, and until next time, keep puffin' everybody.
Either subscribe, donate, or get the fuck out.